Great, we are live. Welcome everybody to This Is Not a Drill. I'm your host for tonight, Melina Abdullah. Everyone knows, I hope, that This Is Not a Drill is the space in which we're kind of using for our political education as Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. And over the last week, there's been a lot moving. We've been assaulted from all sides. We know that the bill that we were carrying, that many of you took action on, SB 731, did not make it to the assembly floor for a vote, which means it died. If you all remember, SB 731 was the Kenneth Ross Jr. police decertification bill, which said that police who kill people or commit serious acts of misconduct should at the very least have their badges, guns, and jobs snatched. And so we didn't get that bill passed, but I did speak with the state senator, Senator Steve Bradford, as well as Kenneth's mom, about the bill, and we're all committed to bringing it up next legislative cycle. In fact, we're trying to look at the different political rules and what might allow us to fast track the bill. I also had a conversation with one of the legislators who was believed to have been a part of the derailing of the bill. He has committed to being a champion of the bill as it moves forward in the next legislative cycle. So we're going to take this as a setback, but not a loss. The greater issue came on Monday. All of this happened on Monday when we saw the murder of one of our loved ones, one of our community members, Dejan Kizee, was killed at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon in South Central Los Angeles on 109th and Budlong by sheriff's deputies. Brother Dejan was accused of vehicle code violations as he was riding his bicycle. I did not know you could have vehicle code violations on a bicycle. Of course, the LA County sheriffs who killed him did what they did in the case of our young brother, AJ Weber, who was killed just a block away just 2 years before. They attempted to assassinate Brother Dejan's character and then criminalize the entire community. And as we're watching these murders, we've had in the past week, Black folks killed in South Central Los Angeles. Just yesterday, we saw one of the most horrific killings that I think we've ever seen on video of a brother in Rochester, New York. We had a young 18-year-old brother killed by police in Washington, D.C., and we're watching the assassination, the killing, the genocide of our people with rapid fire around the globe and especially in the United States. And it's not talked about as much as it should be, but the home of police killings is really Los Angeles. And so as we say the names George Floyd, as we say the name Breonna Taylor, as we say the name Ahmaud Arbery, we must also say the name Anthony McLean, a father of 3, who was killed in Pasadena just 2 weeks ago before Jacob Blake, another father of 3, was shot 7 times in the back. So we have to say these names. And as we say the names of the people on whose behalf we must struggle, we also say names like Mama Harriet Tubman. We say names like Martin Luther King. We say names like Minister Malcolm X, because we remember that as war is being declared on Black bodies, what has kept us here is our unwillingness to submit to our oppression, our unwillingness to submit to that genocide, and our will to fight back. And so many of us are drawing great inspiration from Black athletes who are saying, you know, as long as you put targets on Black bodies, we will not allow our Black bodies to be used for your entertainment. And so I'm so grateful and honored to have here with us tonight on This Is Not a Drill 3 folks who I love and respect and admire, some of whom are my new friends and some who I've known for many, many years, here to talk with us about this long history of Black athletes and what we're calling the Black refusal, a Black refusal which we're seeing permeate really every industry, my industry, higher education. We're doing a scholar strike next week. We're doing a scholar strike, and we're already in a state of Black refusal where we're refusing to abide by the rules of institutions and instead remember not just who we are, but whose we are, that we belong to our people and must use everything that we have to contribute to Black liberation. So let me introduce our panel tonight. I'm so excited to have with us one of my oldest friends, Dr. Brandon Martin, is the athletic director at University of Missouri, Kansas City. He is also the co-chair of the newly founded Black Athletic Directors Alliance. We met when he was an undergrad basketball player at USC, and I was a brand new graduate student working in the athletic center, and we became fast friends and have been friends ever since. And he's definitely someone that I go to around questions like this. Dr. Martin has written extensively on the role of Black athletes, especially in college sports. And so we're really honored to have you here, Dr. Martin. I don't think I'll be able to maintain calling you Dr. Martin for the duration of the conversation, but Brandon, we're delighted to have you here and very honored to have you here, especially with your most recent writings around Black college athletes and their role. So thank you for joining us tonight. We also have my dear sister, Ibtihaj Muhammad. And now Ibtihaj, we became friends just over the last couple of months, but I'll say that I felt an immediate bond with you. I'm so thankful to Mike De La Rocha for introducing us. We also have many other friends in common. And then my family, who's also your family, Danielle Frost, was one of the folks who got you to join us here tonight. Ibtihaj is also one of the people who is a tremendous model for my daughters, Tandiwe and Amara, who look for Black Muslim women to emulate. Ibtihaj is an Olympic medalist in fencing. I need to call on you for some backup sometimes, I think. But what you represented, not just around, this Black Lives Matter moment, just in terms of what it means to be the first hijabi woman to serve as an Olympic sports figure, right? Means the world to my daughters and to me. And so I'm so grateful that you're joining us here tonight. Thank you for being here. And we know that we're only going to have you for about half the time. So we're going to start with you in just a moment.
Thanks for having me.
And we're also grateful to have, you're probably the one who doesn't need an introduction, Derek Fisher, who many folks know, especially if you're watching from Los Angeles, you will always be a Laker, even though you are the head coach of the LA Sparks now. For everybody in Los Angeles, you are as beloved by Los Angeles as you love Los Angeles. And we know that you have a deep love for Los Angeles. I also didn't know about your commitment to social justice until fairly recently. We've been watching the Sparks, and we had a relationship. Black Lives Matter had a relationship with the Sparks for the last several years. People from the Sparks have reached out and said, do you all need some space to just relax? And given tickets to the organizers, and it's been a restorative experience. It's been a healing space for us. But recently, in recent months, you reached out and said, how can I be involved in Black Lives Matter? You've come to our meetings. You've talked with us about the decision of WNBA members to wear Breonna Taylor's name on their jerseys, to put Black Lives Matter on the floor, and to make it a priority of the WNBA. And so we're grateful to have you here. And I asked if I could share, also personally donated to Black Lives Matter. And so we're grateful to have you here, for you being willing to use your platform also to elevate the value and sanctity of Black life. Derek Fisher, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yes. So Ibtihaj, I want to start with you. Because one of the things that continues to come up as we struggle for justice and freedom and think about, our sacred duty as Black people, what continues to come up at our protests, at our meetings, in our casual conversations, is the role of Black women in really leading this movement. And I want to talk with you about what you feel about Black Lives Matter, but I want to begin with your own personal narrative and your decision to enter sports, and to enter sports as your whole and complete self, right? As unapologetically Black, but also unapologetically Muslim, right? Refusing to remove your hijab, right? Finding a sport that allows you to compete with hijab, and then really elevating that. I also know that you've written books about it and that you've been a voice about it. Can you talk with us about how your personal journey really is a model for Black women and Black girls to follow?
Well, I, like a lot of African-American families, in our family, sport was, I would say, like centric to the family dynamic. As kids, if we weren't, playing outside and having fun, my parents demanded that we join sports teams as we got older. And for me, as a Muslim woman, even as a kid, before I would begin to wear hijab, I always found it really difficult to find sports that accommodated my religious beliefs, and eventually wear the hijab. So discovering fencing just seemed like this very unique fit for me. And to be honest, as a kid who grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood and really struggling to find my footing, just being different from everyone else and being made to feel different, being only one of two Muslim families, I would say sport became my safe haven, and it allowed me to be myself, to be strong and be relentless and not feel like I was being judged for those qualities. There's a lot of pressure that exists for us as Black athletes. We're expected to show up and be successful. Like, there's this really high bar that's set of perfection. And when you fall short of that, it seems like, we're just not accepted. And I found that in sport. And for me, this idea that I did not belong as a Black woman, that I was not welcome as a woman who wore hijab, just did not sit right with me. And the premise, I would say, behind really chasing down this Olympic dream was really born from the idea that no one had ever done it before. There'd never been a woman of color, and I had no world ranking. I'd never been to a senior competition at that point, and at 21, but I knew that fencing was a space that should be welcoming to everyone. I feel like that to me is what sport is. And no matter how difficult the journey, I just felt like it came from God. When I look back on my life, and like even having now penned a memoir about it, I don't know how we push past these moments, because the obstacles are really laid out very clearly for us. But I think when we look at our existence, especially as Black athletes, we're kind of taught to push through. And you don't talk about the obstacles, you don't talk about the difficult moments. And I think that the protest and the pushback that we see, especially right now, in this fight for Black lives, it is resonating so strongly with Black athletes, because we know the fight. We've been a part of this fight our entire lives, especially those of us who participate in predominantly white sports. So we know what the pushback looks like. But I think it's just a really profound moment for us to be able to share, the history with other people who apparently, have never read a book.
I want to just also zero in on one of the things that you're saying about this Black Lives Matter moment, because I'm wondering about the position you find yourself in, not just as a Black woman, not just as an athlete, but also as the daughter. Isn't your dad a retired cop?
A narcotics detective, yeah, in Newark, New Jersey.
So how does that position you? Like, and I know you've been outspoken. We've talked before, right? I know you've been outspoken, and I'm wondering how that factors in your home conversations. How does this moment make you feel?
I believe that this conversation is about valuing human life. You know, it doesn't matter what your profession is, you know, cop or not. My dad stands on the side of what's right. And when we look at these videos and we're becoming bombarded with video after video after video of police officers killing Black women and men, we have to speak out. We have to use our platforms. And I've just felt like this is such a strong moment because this has always been a part of my life. I'm always going to speak up. I always feel really strongly about using my voice and my platform to be an agent of change. I don't have as large of a platform as most people coming from a small sport, but that has not, that has not changed how I feel about using my platform for good. And what I think that these moments, particularly George Floyd, it has been a moment that has, changed the course of history. There are more of us who feel like we have to use our platforms, that we don't have a choice. This is a decision between right and wrong to me. And it doesn't matter what your profession is. Yes, my dad was a cop for over 20 years, but when we see our brothers and sisters being killed in the streets at the hands of police violence, we have to do something.
Right. And I think that that's what I meant by not just knowing who you are, but whose you are. That the one thing what's not going to change is that we're Black, right? And so I think a lot of us, white supremacy tries to dupe us into believing that we belong to our professions or that we belong to our quote unquote success. But the truth is that we belong to each other. And I think this moment, this Black Lives Matter moment, is reminding us of that, is reminding us that, it's not going to save you that you're an Olympian, right? It's not going to save Derek Fisher that he is a Laker. Well, what do you have, 5 rings or something? Yeah, right. So what, right? All of that kind of subsides when we talk about that we are always Black. We are still Black, and we have to belong to our people first. And I see a lot of kind of coming to terms with that. I think that I'm wondering if it's taken us longer in this generation than it has in previous generations, because we, especially in the 80s and 90s, there was a conditioning to believe. So at the time when you were in undergrad, Brandon, right? Like there was a conditioning to believe that athletes were somehow special, right? Were Black people with asterisks, right? That we didn't belong to our community. We somehow, not we, because I'm not an athlete, right? But Black folks with professions and Black folks who are somehow ordained in a way by a system become owned by that system rather than owned by the community. It's very different than, in the 1960s when you have a Muhammad Ali, when you have a Tommy Smith and a John Carlos who understand that, no, you Black, right? And who are forced to constantly stand on the side of Black liberation or be fools, right? I think that by the 90s, there was a lot of this kind of Cosbyism, right? That we belong, you can become Black middle class, you can become Black successful people and kind of escape the burden of Blackness. And I know that this is something that you write about and talk about your latest piece. I'm really inspired by the latest piece that you wrote, really challenging Black college athletes to remember that they own themselves, that they're not owned by the university. Can you talk about both? Let's start with that history, but then talk about how that applies to Black college athletes, especially now.
Sure. Melina, I would like to start by just giving you kudos for the work that you've done with Black Lives Matter for almost a decade now, and the indelible mark that you've left not only in LA, but nationally. And so I just want to start out by giving you kudos for that. I also want to take a moment to just define this moment before I get into my piece. You know, this moment is about empowerment. This moment is about elevation. This moment is about anti-exploitation. And this moment is about humanity. And so you've seen the platforms of the NBA, the WNBA, college sports, and even NASCAR. You've seen different examples of that. But more specific to my piece, I wrote a piece where I did some true reflection of my days at USC and what true independence meant. And it wasn't about all of the perks that came with that. It wasn't about all of the swag. It wasn't about the gear. It was not falling into this illusion of inclusion, right? This illusion of inclusion of that you are a part of this club, okay? But you're never going to be a part of the club. You are a tool. You're a tool, okay? And when you're a tool, you are expected to follow a certain blueprint for success. And that takes away from your independence. When you show up on campus and you're given, hey, these are the classes that you're going to take. Yeah, I know you want to major in business. Yeah, I know you want to major in pre-law. But that's not true independence. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to empower college athletes and talk about the clarity of purpose. What exactly are you trying to get done with your activism? And really hone down on that. Identifying some of the barriers and some of the challenges that are in your that really might prevent you from achieving your goals. And in my piece, I talk about that the only obstacle is you, really. The obstacle is you. If you have self-ownership, then you can achieve whatever you want to achieve. The third piece that I talked about is measuring your conviction. And so the conviction has to be the conviction of John Carlos and Tommy Smith. And the conviction has to be about Harry Edwards back in 1967 when he did the revolt with the San Jose State football team. Our student athletes today have to know their history, and they have to have that same level of conviction. And the last point that I made was to have a game plan, okay? Know where you're going. This cannot just be an emotional effort. You have to understand, just like different positions on a basketball team or on a football team, who's going to be the voice? Who's going to be the writer? Who's going to be the person who goes to the director of athletics or the president and say, these are our demands, not our requests, but these are our demands. And so it's a matter of structure. It's a matter of being organized, and it's a matter of seizing this moment and really maximizing it. So that was really what I tried to achieve in terms of empowering the student athletes today.
And I just want to lift up that you actually drew the title of that article from Frederick Douglass, right? So it was
Absolutely.
What the Black student athlete is the 4th of July.
Absolutely.
I always wonder if you got in trouble for that, because if anybody who reads Frederick Douglass's address, if you're drawing from that, that's not a, you know, I don't know who from your university might be watching, so I won't tell them to
Well, Melina, I couldn't use some of the same language that Mr. Douglass used, but, you know, I did.
You had to be respectable.
I did. I had to save my job in a way to be able to communicate it to where it was impactful, and really it was written in a way where student athletes today could really digest it and understand it and really put it into practice.
So I'm wondering if, and I'm going to go back to Ibtihaj about this, right? Because I know you don't have that much more time with us. This idea that Brandon's raising around preserving your job, right? Around thinking about your platform, around thinking about sacrifices that have to come as a result of your struggle. Have you seen this? Have you felt an impact of being outspoken? I'm sure even just the act, not just, but the act of wearing hijab. You know, I get it a lot just for my name, right? And I'm not hijabi, right? How have you and why have you been willing to struggle through that? Because one, can you share with us what sacrifices you feel like you have to make? And two, what makes you refuse to submit and, you know, be on the side of struggle?
You're speaking in reference of hijab, or just being.
So I mean, tell me if I'm
I feel
wrong.
like,
yeah. I feel like hijab is also part of an outspokenness, right? I know it's a submission to the will of God, right? However, in American society, to not hide our Muslim identity is an act of resistance, you know, and, or at least that's how I experience it, right? And so I'm almost, and I could be wrong, so correct me, but I'm equating, you know, there's a courage that comes with wearing hijab almost as much as saying words, right? And so I'm just wondering for you, what is it that you experience? What sacrifices do you feel like you're making? And why are you willing to do that?
I think that the experience, the American experience for the Muslim community drastically changed after 9/11.
Yeah.
And so you did see a lot of people choose to hide parts of their Muslim identity, changing their name from Muhammad to Mo, or maybe using like a different name on, you know, applications or whatever it may be. And some people choosing not to wear hijab. And for me, as an African-American Muslim woman who does wear hijab, it's like I could abandon my hijab, but I'm left with my Black skin, which seems to be very political, right? Both, you know, your ethnicity and also your faith. So I don't think that for me, there's any option. I feel like my faith has always come first. My love for my ancestors and my history has always been, I think, this driving force in my life that helps me understand where I'm going, and also the dedication that I have to make sure that there is always, I think, inclusion in the spaces that I'm in, but also fighting for justice and equality for people who look like me.
Thank you. I'd love to bring Derek into the conversation about, you know, we talk about this beautiful struggle, right? About the importance of stepping up. And I think we're hearing from both Brandon and Ibtihaj that there is a sacrifice that comes with it, that it's not a struggle if you don't have to bear any consequences, right? It's not a struggle if there's no consequences. And some of those consequences, we feel like we're making a choice, but really being Black in this country is already a political statement. And what did you call it, Brandon? The illusion of inclusion that they try to sell you. I'm sure you of all people have been sold. They've attempted to sell you this idea that you are Derek Fisher and you're somehow special. And, you know, you can overcome Blackness, right? And I've watched you and we've seen you, especially in recent months, reject that notion. We've seen players in recent months in every sport reject that notion. Someone's texting now, ask Derek Fisher about Craig Hodges, right? And the consequences that have been paid throughout the history of the NBA, but also the history of sport. And so I'm wondering if you can just respond to that, and especially in this Black Lives Matter moment, why it seems like en masse Black athletes are saying we're not going to submit to a system of sport that really exploits Black bodies and profits from Black bodies, but isn't doing anything to protect Black life in the world.
Yeah, no, it's we could be on here for hours really trying to explore and break all this down. I first want to note, similar to Brandon, like the role that you as a woman, Ibtihaj as a woman, and the role that women and women of color have always played in the movement and in this movement at this time. For me, working in the WNBA with women and so many impactful women of color that I coach and work with and lead, I'm seeing it firsthand, how much of a difference and impact it has on the community, on this world that we live in, that women of color continue to lead from the front. Maybe in some ways because it's always been that way, and you've never had a choice, but we thank you. We really thank you. Um, I think that several of the points that you each have made about why, you know, how some of the things that rang a bell for me, right? The conditioning that you referenced is a point that was moving. I think the identity, that's one thing that, from my experience, right? So much of my identity as a young man, when I first moved to LA to play for the Lakers, so much of my identity was wrapped in the success in my job and in my sport. Some of that is just male ego, right? That we, you know, it's men like big TVs and cars and all of these things that are attached to the male ego. And as an athlete, your success in your sport is also one of those things that you kind of measure yourself by. And so in a lot of ways for athletes, we were conditioned and taught in a sense from a very young age that that's how we measured ourselves. That was our big card. And if you are not being successful in your sport, then quote unquote, you're failing. So that becomes our focus. That becomes our lifestyle. And we lose the connection and the education, and the touch point of where we fit into the larger community of Black people, of people in our communities, of where we came from, where we grew up. We typically move to the city where we play, and we don't look back. We start a family, we raise our children in a different city, and we move on. And I believe that what makes this right now so different and so much more impactful, that the future is changing as we speak, is because I believe that so many of our young athletes now don't see their entire identity wrapped up in what they do for a living. I believe that mold is being broken down. That you're seeing some of the most prominent athletes, similar to Tommy Smith, similar to Muhammad Ali, similar to Bill Russell, similar to so many that became before us, Oscar Robertson, that I could think of, that stood on things that were so much bigger than the sport, even suffering the consequences themselves. I believe that our young athletes are teaching us, even as an old athlete, that your identity is not wrapped up in your stats. It's not wrapped up in how many championships you won. It's not wrapped up in how many points you scored. You are who you are as a Black man, a Black woman, and that will be with you forever, while you're playing, after you're playing. And it's moving. Again, seeing it here with these women, for me, gives it's an even different perspective of what is happening right now, because women have been forgotten in a lot of these conversations around the movement and the change that needs to happen. You're leading us from the front, but we're not saying your names loud enough in the back. And so being here with women and working with them every day, getting a chance to see how we've also missed out on amplifying the way women are treated by police, the way women are treated in our systems, the way things are baked in systemically, not just for people of color, but then you double down on that and say women of color have had it twice as hard or even more than most. And so for me, I historically have not, I'm more shy. I'm a pretty reserved person. I don't usually speak out on things that I don't understand myself, which is why when I reached out to you, I wanted to come to meetings. I wanted to listen. I wanted to learn. I wanted to educate myself because I'm not trying to get followers and likes by just posting something on social media that has no meaning to me. That's not
And let's
personal
be
to me.
clear, it was not posted. You came to Black Lives Matter meeting, stayed for the whole thing. It was not posted. You stayed there. We all had on masks, so people didn't know who you were. You know, you listened to the presentations, you participated in the workshops, and it was there. It was one of the most genuine interactions that we've had, because we've had lots of high profile people say, come meet with me for lunch separately, right? But for you to come in that way with no fanfare, it never got posted, right? I think that spoke volumes. And I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to underline what it was you were saying.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. So you know, my fiance and I, we have 5 children together. Uh, 2 are daughters, 3 are boys, ranges in age from 17 to 11. And, um, you know, one of our sons who's 14, when he was 10, just 4 years ago, he had no, like he was fearful of these type of conversations because it sounded scary, and he had seen movies on television and there were things that he didn't understand at 10. But the point that Ibtihaj made about the moment that we saw what happened to George Floyd and something about that in our experience that just changed the conversation for everybody. My son at 14, he was the first one that told me that that happened. I did not know it had taken place that night. He informed me of it. And that is how I knew this was different. We tried to show our kids, you know, movies and films to educate them, etc. And those are uncomfortable conversations for him just a couple years ago. And now, even at 14, he's realizing as a young Black male, whether some of the conversations we've had around the table, some of the things that we have chosen to show him and our kids on television and through the way we consume our content now in our media. That's also a part of how this has changed. Everybody has a platform. As athletes, we used to have to wait for the newspaper reporter or journalist to come and ask us some questions, and then it would go into a newspaper and maybe somebody would see it on page 8. If something had happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, or Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I played for the Lakers, well, I don't watch the local news in Minneapolis. I never would have heard about that until 2 years later that happened. We hear about that instantly now. Like our kids are telling us what's happening in the world instantly. And I believe that also is impacting the way athletes are consuming what is happening around the world. And to Ibti's point, you don't have a choice. It's literally right in your face. And the example that you want to set for your children and the people that have supported us and put us in the position where we are to have this platform, you have to say something, and not just say something, do something. I'm a big believer in the recognition and awareness of what role you play within a team. Everybody doesn't need to score 20 points and be the superstar. There are some people that have to do the dirty work behind the scenes to make things go. Some of the legislation that you're speaking of that gets knocked off the legislative table, how do we get those things back on? What about education reform? What are we doing in terms of financial literacy? How are we changing the way our young people are being taught life skills that don't just fit in a textbook that was written by someone that has not had our experience? I want to play a role in those things that may not always be on the front lines, yet we get shouted down for not doing it the way other people think we're supposed to do it, which then leads people to sometimes not wanting to be as involved. So there's so many underlying things in this movement. I'm just really fulfilled and grateful that so many people of all ages and all ethnicities and backgrounds, sports, business. Dr. Martin's an athletic director with a sport background, is in sports, but we all come from different things that feel like now is the time for us to come together to try and do something. We've been conditioned to feel like we have to protect our own and do it ourselves, because especially for women, you've had to be the sheroes yourself. But to see us all finding ways to come together, as a guy that's played team sports since the age of 6, every great thing that's happened in my life has been because of the group, not because of just one person. And so I'm just happy to be, again, a small part of this conversation and try to do anything I can to be helpful.
Thank you. And so for people like me who aren't really sure where things stand right now, I know the NBA had talked about shutting down the rest of the season. I know that there were people who walked off their jobs as sports commentators. Where are we with this stuff? And we want this to be a collective conversation. So if you're watching on Facebook, any questions that you have, please type them in the comments, and we have people watching the comments. They'll feed them to us and we'll make sure that we ask these questions. But where are things, because I don't know how to keep up with what's going on. I understand that we all prefer Barack Obama to Donald Trump. I'm assuming that we all prefer Barack Obama to Donald Trump. However, I got a little bone to pick with President Obama, because I'm understanding that he pushed people back from their positions, and what was won is turning like these arenas into voting centers. Is that kind of where we are, or is there something more going on still? And if you could just give us the short version so we can get some of these viewer comments in too.
Yeah, no, the short version, I definitely am more connected to what is happening here in the WNBA. They call it the Wubble, or so than directly what is taking place with the men on the NBA side. My understanding, briefly, of things on the NBA side in terms of President Obama was more influencing the guys to recognize that you can still have an impact and use your platforms to create change while still doing your job. So I think his influence was more in, similar to what Dr. Brandon's point was earlier about this not just being an emotional effort, right? That I think athletes are recognizing that it's not just about whether it's a boycott of one game or the rest of the playoffs or whatever it is, but what is after that? What is the plan? What's the game plan? How do we extend beyond just missing one game or 5 games or 10 games? On the women's side, we also boycotted two nights, 2 rounds of games, and then resumed action a few days later, but with commitments and an understanding of the important initiatives and programs that women want to continue to champion, making sure that women are not getting lost in this conversation. Typically in the mainstream media, because of the conditioning, we say the male names and the Black male names that have been gunned down and murdered by police, but we do not talk as long and as exhaustively about the Black women and the women of color that have been taken down by police brutality and murdered and killed. And so for these women, it was extremely difficult to support their NBA brothers for the stand that they took that night and move towards them in partnership, at the same time knowing that women are still always going to get lost in that unless we do something different and makes changes. So in my estimation and my understanding from being right here in this moment, that these women are not going to let up on saying her name, and not just saying things, but doing things. And again, as a coach, my job is to help put them in position to be successful. And so anything that I can do, I'm just going to try and help them as much as possible.
So are they still wearing Breonna's name on their jerseys? Or are they still?
In the WNBA, Breonna Taylor's name is on the back of every woman that plays in the WNBA all season, every game. And then before every WNBA game that is played, the African American Policy Forum, specific women's names and families that have been impacted by police brutality, murdered, killed. Unfortunately, they show tribute videos. The players are oftentimes put in contact with the families to offer support, to have conversations. There's a lot happening behind the scenes that is also keeping this in the forefront of every woman here and every coach and staff member that's here as well.
Great. So we'd love to maintain, and I know that we're in contact, but sometimes the names of Black women who are killed in Los Angeles aren't always lifted up. So, you know, we might hear about Breonna Taylor, but not know about Keisha Michael, who was killed by Inglewood police with her partner, Marquittin Sandlin, leaving 7 children without their parents, right? We might not talk about Waukesha Wilson, who was killed inside LA Metro Detention Center. It's really important to say Shailene Graves' name, to say Megan Hockaday's name, to say Mitrice Richardson's name. And we see that sometimes with Los Angeles generally, that more people are killed here than any locale in the country. But for some reason, the names of those local deaths are not lifted up. So we'd love to talk more, and I'll reach out after about how we might be able to tie that in with the work that you all are doing with the Sparks. Brandon, something that's coming up in the chat is questions about college athletes. And I know that you and I have talked before about the college athlete from, what was it, Ole Miss, who got the flag change?
Yeah, it was Colin Hill.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I don't know what's happening, why all of a sudden there's this awakening that people are willing to put themselves on the line. But I know we were both incredibly inspired by him. Can you talk about what he did and the long-lasting that'll have?
Yeah, well, I think, Melina, the unfortunate piece is that, you know, it took George Floyd, it took Breonna Taylor, it took Ahmaud Arbery for not only collegiate athletes, but professional athletes to really have the courage to come out and really have a voice. Okay, so that's number one. But kudos to Colin Hill, who really was adamant to say that, hey, I'm not going to compete, I'm not going to practice, I'm not going to be a member of the team at Mississippi State unless there are some changes to the Confederate flag in Mississippi. And the emblem of the flag was changed. He was rewarded with a key to the city in his hometown in Mississippi. And I think that's the type of courageous effort and action that we need by our student athletes. One of the things that has been trendy in college athletics is about taking statues down, taking names off of buildings, you know, as a way to make a statement about change. And that's fine. The other piece is that lately, a lot of college student athletes have boycotted practices. And so as a way to make a statement. And, you know, I understand that. But what I would like, Melina, is for the student athletes to truly understand why they are making a statement and why they are protesting. I want them to be educated on that.
So do you think they don't understand? Do you think that they're?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think that our college student athletes.
No, I'm gonna talk to you like you my friend. So
they need, I know. So our college athletes, they need a history lesson. Okay. And, you know, I think it needs to be mandatory for them to take some Black Studies courses so that they understand the pioneers that have paved the way for them to have the opportunities that they have today. This, and I'll say this again, this cannot just be an emotional response. This cannot be a response that you look on social media and you see your friend at some local university and they're saying what they're going to do with their team. Okay, this has to be something that's really a true conviction of yours. And I'll connect that with, there has to be an education and also an empowerment and encouragement by the coaches, right? Coaches play huge pieces in the development of our student athletes. And I would argue that some of our coaches need education as well. Okay, they go into the living rooms and they recruit and they sell the university, they sell themselves, they sell their program, but they need education as well. They spend the most time with our student athletes, so they need that education. But
can I pause you for just a second?
Yeah.
Because there's something that you said before you get too far down the road. There's something that you said that I want us to interrogate, and I hope that this could be a collective conversation, and I'm hoping my sister can back me a little bit on this. I think that there's something to be said for being deliberate and thoughtful and being grounded in history, right? We're educators. So, you know, of course, this is what I do, right? I feel like we have to develop our intellectual tools, but also as people in sports, maybe I'm expecting you to understand this more fully, or maybe to kind of side with me differently, that I think that there's a role for intellectualism, but what moves us into action is actually not the intellectualism. It's not being deliberate that builds a movement, right? We, when I think about Black Lives Matter, when we were birthed in 2013, 7 years ago, right? It was absolutely an intuitive movement. And I'm saying that you would understand this as folks in sports because, you know, you're not thinking I'm going to turn this way and then I'm going to move this way, right? There's an intuition that also goes into it. And so when we think about young people being willing to engage in this moment of resistance, I don't want to pull them away from the intuition, from the spirit, from the emotionalism of it, because I feel like that's really what drives the movement. And so I'm wondering if other folks want to get in on this piece, this balance between intellectualism, but also the intuitive nature of movement building.
Wow.
That, you know, you might not be willing to put everything on the line if you think about it too long.
Well, Melina, I'm just going to say this and we can open it up. Okay. I know where you're going with this. Being intuitive and just being reactive, right?
Not reactive.
Okay. I'm saying it has to be constructive.
Reaction and intuition, right?
I'm just saying it has to be constructive actions. Okay. It has to be constructive actions. And a lot of this, you know, it is on me as the director of athletics. Indeed, you probably understand this, you know, that a lot of this falls on me. So
you calling on the brother, I'm calling on the sister. You're trying to get.
I'm just saying, I'm just saying that there's a way that we can get there, right? But we just might have some different approaches. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Ibtihaj, can you back me up, please?
Tagging me in. You know, I would have to agree with Melina. I don't know if there needs to be a full-fledged game plan as to what happens next, right? Especially when we think of us as African Americans having been a part of the struggle for so long. Enough is enough, right? I disagree with the thought that, you know, LeBron and company and like everyone in the NBA or even WNBA had to have a game plan when they decided to stop playing, when they decided to strike from their jobs. I think that it caused waves, across our nation. It caused people to stop and think. There are people who have no idea the very traumatic history, the 400 plus years of traumatic history that has deeply affected the Black community. And I don't think that you have to understand or know that, I don't think that you have to know the history and have a play-by-play to know that something is very wrong with our country. There are people who are learning about redlining for the very first time, which is crazy to me. Even when I think back in my own childhood, I grew up in a predominantly white community. I was one of the only Black kids in my class. And even though I was like, well, this is strange. Why am I one of the only Black kids in advanced placement classes? It wasn't until recently that my township made changes to kind of, I think, combat this system that has existed for so long. Sometimes we go through the motions that we don't realize that there needs to be change. And I don't believe that you need to have a really strong understanding of history. It's very clear that our educational system has failed us. So for people to decide that they're going to protest by maybe not showing up to practice, or maybe just joining the movement and taking their first step in the right direction, I think it's something. And to be honest, as someone who's been a part of this marathon my entire life, I applaud those people who make that first choice. I don't think you need a game plan. You need a game plan to take the first step.
Ashay.
Yeah. No, I think everybody agrees with that. I don't think there's a separate opinion there. I think we're all kind of agreeing. It's more about, not even more about, in addition to those first steps or that initial reaction, emotional response, that is your genuine, authentic, like, this is how I feel. I'm not doing this today or tomorrow or however long you decide that, is to not typically, right, when we come off of this really big emotional reaction or response to something, there's a letdown that just kind of, like, in our systems tend to take place. And so historically, it feels like we've done that a lot as a people, right? We react viscerally, strongly initially, and then we don't remain together and thoughtful and being able to see beyond the initial reaction to, not, we have to know A to Z the plan, but that we at least are willing to see that we're going to have to see this all the way to Z. This is not just about the ABC reaction. We're in this forever, and what are we doing there? And that's, to, at least for me, what athletes in terms of playing, what I feel like was missed, right? There were different things that we may reacted to in real time, but then we got back to work, so to speak, and didn't continue the action and the movement. And I think that this is different, where these young men and women are able to still play and perform and do what they love to do, right? And I think Draymond Green has recently spoke to it, that there are, like, we don't ask educators to stop educating in order to be a part of the movement, right? And I think athletes have to continue to challenge themselves. As coaches, we have to challenge ourselves. We can still have a profession or a job and still be part of the movement. Those things do not have to be mutually exclusive. And that's been an excuse that we've either used, been conditioned to use, or whatever, but it doesn't stick anymore. You got to do something.
Right. We're running out of time. I think all of those points are well taken. And I think what you all are really pointing to is also the role of organizers, right? So the intuition, the emotion is necessary to bring people to the movement. But then it becomes maybe the role of organizers to say, all right, people are awake. How do we bring you forward and more deeply into the movement? How do we, as these moments unearth themselves, how do we develop a plan? I think it's one of the reasons why the moment the world cracked wide open after the murder of George Floyd, it erupted into what is now being called the largest movement in global history. in part because we've been doing groundwork for 7 years. And so there was kind of, maybe this is part of the point that you're making, there was somewhat of a game plan, right? And so what I want to say as we close out is that we want everybody to come into this movement, that it is of the utmost importance that we not submit to these systems that tell us that you are only an athlete or you are special because you are an athlete, and you don't have to do anything for your people besides play. We need you to do more than play. And we're grateful to those of you who are willing to use your platforms, who are willing to coach in a way that tells your players, right, it's good that you do more than play, who are willing to provide protections to your student athletes, which sometimes I think that folks forget that as we talk about a college sports industry where universities make money off the backs of these students, that they are students first, right? And that they have a right to step into their fullest selves, and they need athletic directors like the Black athletic directors in the Black AD Alliance to provide them with some protection and guidance. I want to uplift the name once again of Dejan Kizee, who was killed on Monday here in Los Angeles. I want to remind our viewers on Facebook that we're having a mass action on Saturday at 4 p.m. in front of the sheriff's station on Imperial Highway at 4 p.m. We're telling everybody to bring their bikes, skateboards, roller skates, and energy to say that there is no excuse for murdering Black folks. Biking while Black is not a crime. And we want everybody to be there, and please spread the word. We need folks with platforms to be there, because unfortunately, if we don't have folks with platforms, sometimes these stories get buried. So we invite you all to come out, and we're grateful for all of your work. Is there just a last word that each of you all want to give before we sign off?
I just want to acknowledge that in terms of in Los Angeles, and making sure that those stories are not getting lost. Just I would love to continue to just remain in contact and make sure we find ways to say those names and amplify those families and make sure that they know they're not lost.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Melina, I just think that it's imperative that we have yourself and organizations like BLM to help us in college athletics to really carry out the mission with our student athletes and our respective athletic programs. So thank you so much for having all of us tonight, and this has been fantastic.
Thank you, sis.
And I work with Athletes for Impact. So if there are any athletes out there, professional or not, who are interested in finding their footing in activism, there's a lot of different social issues that we work to tackle. And that's how I was connected to Melina. So I look forward to working together in the future.
Indeed. Thank you all so much. Join us every Thursday for This Is Not a Drill, and we're grateful to each of you for joining us. Thank you especially to Pro Bono ASL. Thank you so much for being here and always providing interpretation for us. Thank you to Megan and Rajay for our tech support, and the entire Black Lives Matter Los Angeles team. Peace out.